Okay, good morning. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and it is Friday, March 21st. Oh my gosh, we made it Friday. And we've got a bunch of council with us now, so.
Okay, good.
And we are joined this morning by Senator Ingalls, who is sponsor of S124, and then we're gonna walk through it. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Senator Russ Ingalls, Chair of Senate Agriculture, and I want to thank Chair Watson and the Natural Resources Committee for inviting me in to talk about our miscellaneous agriculture bill S124. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the Senate Agriculture Committee. We started out this biennium with an agreement among our 5 senators to do whatever we could do to help and protect our farmers in the state of Vermont. We also committed to helping all farmers in our state, to which there are 23 classifications of, to grow their markets, to help fund them where we could, and to help shield them from legislation that could be deemed harmful to them as they look to scale and prosper. And why would we commit to that? Why do farmers need our help more than ever? Well, 100 years ago, Vermont was 80% farmland. In the 1960s, as the Vermont population began to grow, farmland started to disappear at a rapid rate, which caused great concerns that government chaired a commission to study Vermont farmland losses. In 1970, the findings of that study was a catalyst of Act 250, a law that was to manage growth and to protect farmlands as we understood it. Since that time, our population has grown more than 50%, 420,000 to 647,000. We've also lost 56% of our harvested cropland at a time where the watt consumed locally grown product has increased to the highest level ever. We've lost 4,000 cow dairies. We now have 439. And here is a scary statistic. From January 2020, right before COVID started, to now, we've lost 32% of our cow dairies, 649 to 439. Losses are both long and short term. In the last 5 years, we've lost 11% of our harvested cropland. At the end of 2022, only 9% of the Vermont land was harvested cropland. And for the first time, farmers manage more forest than they do cropland. The majority of farms lose money, and the average age of farmers is almost 58 years old. There have also been very many bright spots and successes, including the findings that now Vermont Agriculture can proudly say that farmers contribute $4.2 billion to our economy, which rivals tourism. This allows us to now brag Vermont is an agriculture state. To get to this huge number, Vermont farmers have embraced broad diversification and value-added processing. Keeping farmers on the land is essential to continuing growing our own food, sustain our rural economy and communities, and to keep a related job, including Cabot, Ben & Jerry, DFA, and a total of 164 dairy processors, not to mention all the farm labor that comes with running these industries. Vermont farmers maintain our landscape and promote and facilitate tourism. In fact, when traveling on the roads of Vermont, there's a beautiful view at every distance and beyond. Most times you can thank a farmer for that. There's hardly a promotional picture of Vermont that cannot be attributed to a Vermont farmer, whether it be a standing field of corn, a freshly cut field, an orchard filled with fruit, or a picture of a cow. For agriculture, farms, and food are fundamental to Vermont, but our base industry is often overlooked or taken for granted, and Vermont farmers compete with farms throughout the country and world. We continue to lose farms and farmland, and to sustain them, Vermont farms need to be a priority. Farmers will adapt to most everything as they have shown during the times of climate change, and learning to bring predictability to the because farmers thrive on certainty, which brings us to why we're here this morning. But please allow me to say another thing about our Senate Agriculture Committee. On our first day meeting, we also committed to keeping politics out of our committee. We recognize that everyone in the room would feel pressured to vote one agenda or another, but we needed to resist that and always put our farmers first. We feel that S124 does that. All that we are trying to accomplish is to settle the dispute between the EPA, Conservation Law Foundation, Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and the Agency of Natural Resources, so that farmers can make plans, changes, develop practices to keep non-point discharges absent, or any discharges for that matter, at the bare minimum into our state waterways. S124 changes the responsibilities of who's in charge of compliance, all the while making sure that farmers our Vermonters through the Agency of Agriculture and A&R are the ones that are accomplishing the goal of keeping our waterways pristine instead of the EPA. Which the EPA prefers it to be that way. In fact, there's never been a time when the EPA has taken over the lead role of the state monitoring clean water. With that, you know, the bill as written by Attorney Grady, I think you'd be the one best to go down through it. And I'd like to turn the floor over to him or answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Well, I have one question for you, so. Is there, my understanding is that it is, the bulk of it is S100. Is there anything else besides that? There were some other things that were in there that are, not S100. Do you want to highlight it, or maybe?
Yeah, Attorney Grady could do that,
Okay,
but
okay.
I will say this, because it's a very fair question.
Yeah.
But when we did this, and Attorney Grady, you know, could comment whether I don't think it's a big thing whether he does or not. We asked, let's do the barest minimum of what we could do to resolve this dispute, knowing full well that this was a landing page, knowing full well. And that's really what we try to do. We really, when I say, and we talk about it all the time in our committee, let's keep politics out of it. Let's do what's best for farmers. Let's other committees that, you know, have to do that and have to play that role. We'll let them do that. But let's do the barest minimum of what we can do to settle the dispute between us so that we can have predictability and we know what we need to do, because that's all the farmers want to do. They don't want to be in the middle of that.
Fair enough. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome.
Morning.
Morning. So I know a lot of this is stuff that we've seen from S100. But I particularly want to just, you know, make sure that if there are other things, I just want to, I know there are probably things that are not our jurisdiction that are in here. It'd be good to know what they are, but we don't need to necessarily go in depth.
Sure, I'll just give a little bit of context. Like normally every year, the Agency of Agriculture comes to both houses and asks for a miscellaneous agricultural subjects bill in both houses. Normally there are multiple subjects in each bill. This year there's one subject in each bill. And in the Senate miscellaneous agricultural subjects bill, it's ag water quality. And it is, as Senator Ingalls noted, changes that would conform Vermont statute to the EPA requirement that A&R be specifically the lead entity for purposes of issuing Federal Clean Water Act NIPTES permits for concentrated animal feeding operations. But what the original miscellaneous agricultural subjects bill did was only addressing the Agency of Agriculture's water quality provisions. During discussion of the bill, the Senate Agriculture Committee heard testimony from A&R that said you probably should put both of the agency's proposed changes together as one package, because there are changes that are required for both of their statutory authorities. And so that is what S124 is. The first 18 pages are what were the miscellaneous agriculture bill. The last 20 pages are based on S100, but the agency had requested changes after S100 was introduced. So it is not word by word replication of S100. That's it. You want me to walk through the bill?
Great.
Okay. So you're on S124 as introduced. The first page, first section is amending the agricultural water quality requirements in Title VI, the Agency of Agriculture's authority. And that first section, 4810, is one of the main ag water quality sections. And what you're really amending is there are multiple provisions in this bill that reference cooperation between the two agencies and amend existing law regarding them entering a memorandum of understanding on how that they were going to administer the ag water quality program in relation to the federal program. The reference to the MOU is being struck at EPA's request, and what is being replacing it is a reference to a document that describes the rights and responsibilities of both agencies in implementing water quality requirements in the state. So I say that because I'm just gonna, when the 5 or 6 times this comes up, I'm just gonna say this is the change to the MOU language, okay? And so on page 2, you will see that change to the MOU language. There's the directive that the Agency of Natural Resources shall implement the federal CAFO requirements, and the Secretary of Ag shall implement the state's comprehensive complementary non-point source program, and that they shall coordinate, and that then you see the striking of all that language related to the MOU. So the MOU language is being struck. And on page 3, you will see, after consultation with EPA, the 2 agencies shall issue a document that sets forth actually it's A&R that issues the document that sets forth the respective roles and responsibilities of A&R in implementing the Federal Clean Water Act, and the Agency of Ag in implementing the non-clean source program on farms. And then you'll see specifically page 3, line 13 and 14, that document replaces the MOU. And then on page 4, you will see that there is a reference on lines 13 through 16 that the agencies report to you with separate performance measures on how they are performing under the MOU. Well, since there's no more MOU, they're just going to submit to you basically 3 separate measures of performance of the agencies in implementing the Federal Clean Water Act and state non-clean source regulatory program. Moving on from there, page 5, lines 11 through 17, you probably all know that there are minimum buffer requirements for farms under the state ag water quality program. This is providing that those minimum state buffers shall not apply to a farm that A&R has determined needs a CAFO permit. Operations determined to be CAFO shall instead comply with setback and buffer requirements established in the federal CAFO rules. I'm not going to try to summarize it, because when I tried this before, I said them wrong according to the agency. So you really need to know what they are.
I have a question here.
So
We can also hear from someone else about it too. Put a pin in that question and come back to it.
yes,
Okay, let's do that. Make a note, we'll ask that question.
page 6, section 3, these are the permit requirements for large farm operations. One of the things that EPA said in its request for corrective action plan is that it has to be clear that A&R is the one that determines whether there is a discharge that requires that federal CAFO permit. So this change on page 6, lines 16 through 19, just clarifies that it's not the agency of ag that's going to issue a written determination regarding whether or not there has been permanent discharge to waters of the state. It's going to be on page 7. They'll be the Secretary of Natural Resources will be, the agency of ag will refer a potential discharge to the agency of natural resources, and the agency of natural resources will determine if the large farm needs a permit. And if a farm is not required to get that CAFO permit, then it remains in the agency of agriculture's jurisdiction. But if it's required to get that CAFO permit, it will be in our jurisdiction. Page 7 at the bottom of the page. That's really where it's a conforming amendment to the definition of what a large CAFO is. And it's really to add the language on page 8. If 2 or more individual farms are in common ownership and adjoin each other, then the agency can determine that that is one farm for the purpose of permitting. I mean, think about it, these permits are based on how many animals you have on each farm. So if you wanted to get crafty, you could split up your farm and split up your animals and you don't need. But this is saying, no, you can't do that, you can't certainly let the permit requirements in that way. Moving on to page 9, at the bottom of the page, going on to page 10. This is a provision that will take the bill to finance most likely. It says that during any calendar year in which a person has to pay the large CAFO permit or obtain a large CAFO permit, they do not have to pay the LFO fee, and they pay a $2,500 operating fee, basically to A&R. Moving down, you're moving out of large farm permitting to medium farm permitting in section 4. You can go to page 12 for the where the changes begin. The changes really are on page 13, and this is the MOU changes, striking reference to the MOU, the cooperation, referencing that they are going to have a document, and that the agency of ag thinks that there is a permit or thinks that there is a discharge. The agency of ag needs to refer that case to A&R for A&R to determine whether a discharge occurred or whether to direct a medium farm to obtain a permit. If the farm is not required to obtain a CAFO permit, then it remains with an agency of ag's jurisdiction. And then going on to page 14. What I just described to you was the language under the medium farm general permit. Now you're on page 14 and you're on subsection D, and this is the medium and small farm individual permit. This is basically the same change. Bottom of page 14, line 19 to 21, clarifying who is making the determination of the discharge. Clarifying in page 15 that the agency of natural resources is the one that directs a medium or small farm to obtain a permit, CAFO permit. And then clarifying on page 15 and 14 through 18, the CAFO permit is required, then the small or medium farm remains under the jurisdiction of the agency of agriculture. Now, there is a little bit of a on page 15, line 19, 20, operating fee there for the medium farm. It doesn't have that same language about if it's required to get that CAFO permit, it doesn't have to pay the annual MFO fee. And so I think that might be something that should have caught before and should be included in the bill at some point, because otherwise if it was required to get the CAFO permit and it was a medium farm, technically it would have to pay 2 fees without that language.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
So the MFO or LFO permit is an existing permit and fee, the $2,500 fee. And so the language in the previous, in the large farm section is just saying if you have to get a CAFO permit, you don't also have to pay the LFO fee, is that right? Okay, yeah, that's
So-
what you want to here too.
So you'll see language later on about if you're required to get an MFO CAFO permit, you don't need to get a CAFO permit. But I just want to have clarity between the two titles. And yes, there is a CAFO permit already, but you will also see that the agency is going to adopt the rule, A&R is going to adopt the rules and issue new CAFO permit. It just modernize what they have. Page 16, line 3, section 5. This is a section of law related to seasonal application of manure. This is just clarifying that there is a ban between December 15th and April 1, unless the application is authorized under an emergency exemption granted by the Secretary of Agriculture. And there are. That's basically the change in that section.
Can I ask a question of that? Well, this might be a question for another time, I'm unfamiliar with the idea of an emergency exemption for manure. Like, just the situation that might arise. But I can ask that of another,
So when would there be an emergency?
right,
It's usually when your manure storage is at full capacity or over capacity. And there is continued supply into that storage and otherwise the storage will fail unless you have the opportunity to land apply it.
gotcha, okay. That makes sense, thank you, that's helpful.
On page 18. This is in the small farm certification language. This is just really technical and it allows for any newly eligible or identified farm to submit certification compliance with the RFPs and require any small farm to regularly certify ongoing compliance. And then on page 18, line 13, you move out of the Title VI Agency of Agriculture sections and you move into the Title 10 AMR sections. And most of the rest of the 20 pages relate to amendments to ANR statutes. So there's a couple of session loss provisions, but most of it is amending Title 10. The first changes in section 7 are amending the default definitions in 10 VSA chapter 47. 10 VSA chapter 47 is the chapter of law related to water resources in the state. Within that chapter, there are multiple subchapters, and some of those subchapters have their own definitions as well, which you're going to see in a minute. But these are the definitions that apply to the entire chapter. And so one of the key definitions is page 19, line 12 through 15, the definition of what is a water. In Vermont, the requirement to get a permit is when you are discharging waste to waters of the state, and waters is a very broad term. It's pretty much everything that you can think of. Now, going back to the top of the page, you'll see the definition of discharge, page 19, lines 1 through 3. That is what requires the permit, the placing, depositing, or emission of any waste. And currently it's just waste, but under the Federal Clean Water Act requires a permit when there's a discharge of pollutants. And you're going to see a definition of pollutants. So this will conform Vermont to the discharge standard in federal law, but it will also still have that. Well, we're going to get to that discussion in a minute. It potentially will have that broader application to all waters because the Federal Clean Water Act is limited to discharges of pollutants to waters of the United States. You may have heard discussion repeatedly over the past 5 years of what is a water of the United States. And I thought the government had gotten to a place where they had reasonable surety of what they wanted, but the new administration has just announced that they are going to revise it again. So that's like 4 or 5 times in the last 4 to 5 years. That's the definition will be revisited.
So you have to include the Gulf of Mexico and waters.
And I'm recalling a feeling, we had some of this discussion.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, so as this is written right now, sorry.
Why don't we skip ahead a
Yeah,
little bit? I'd like you to, just on this issue, and I'm going to have to go back again. But on page 26, there's a definition of waters of the United States. Because the federal CAFO permit program applies to waters of the United States. And generally, waters of the United States are navigable waters, interstate waters, tributaries of those waters, interstate waters. Like Lake Champlain. Or wetlands with surface connections to a navigable water or a tributary. And that has always been the point of contention when a wetland becomes a water of the United States. But there's a question here. Do you want it to be limited to waters of the United States, or do you want it to be waters as Vermont defines it? You might want to talk to the Agency of Natural Resources about that, or advocates, or whomever you want to talk to. Is it easier to just have one definition and not try to parse between which water is which water? Or is it easier to run a program and have a narrower scope when you're dealing with just waters of the United States instead of a broader definition of waters? I think that's
Question here, and then I have a question.
So for that to work, it require the Vermont definition be broader than the federal definition, right?
right.
Yeah, okay.
Knowing that waters is defined on page 19, and it's also, we've got waters of the United States on page 26.
Remember, there's the default definitions for the entire chapter.
Right,
And then there's specific definitions for some of the subchapters. And that's what you have on page 20, line 13. You have a new subchapter in chapter 47 for concentrated animal feeding operation permanent. And so the first key definition is on page 21. It's the definition of animal feeding operation. You don't need a CAFO permit unless you're an AFO. You have to be an AFO in order to be a CAFO. And so what is an AFO?
Michael, I love that.
Page 21, line 3 through 5. An AFO is a lot or facility where the following conditions are met. Animals have been, are, or will be stable or confined and fed or maintained for a total of 45 days or more in any 12-month period. The cross vegetation or forage growth are not sustained in the normal growing season over any portion of the lot or facility. So it's where your animals are for 45 days or more, and it's been denuded. Well, most farms are gonna have that. There have been questions, well, what if I'm an organic farm and my cows just get rotated in the pasture and they never have to feed on denuded vegetation? Well, they probably have a barn, probably have a milk house. That's probably, they're in that probably 45 days or more. You probably also have a place where you store your tractor or your equipment, and where the animals are potentially there for 45 days or more. So I don't see a lot of opportunity for a farm to say that they're not in AFO. I think most of them, not all of them, will be in AFO if they're managing dairy. But you then need to have a determination whether you're a CAFO. And that's on page 21, line 18 to 19. And a CAFO means an AFO that's defined as a large, a medium, or a small CAFO. And that takes you the definition of large CAFO on page 22, lines 4 and 5. For purposes of Vermont, the key number of animals is 700 or more mature dairy animals. There is a reverse note ARC list there for other animals that would trigger the permit, but they're not necessarily, as far as I know, not triggering that permit in Vermont. So you have to have 700 or more, and then you have to have any one of the following conditions on page 22, lines 15 and 20 on page 23. Waste are discharged into waters of the United States via point source, so directly from the CAFO into water. Waste are discharged directly into waters that originate outside of or pass over, across, or through the facility, or otherwise come into direct contact with the animals confined in the operation. That's language that's pretty much from the Federal Clean Water Act and the CAFO rules. And then on page 23, the third way is that there's a precipitation related discharge of manure, litter, or processed wastewater from land areas under the control of the AFO that was not in accordance with the site-specific nutrient management plan that ensures appropriate agricultural utilization of the nutrients in the manure, litter, or processed wastewater. So that's what's stopped. Under the Federal Clean Water Act, a discharge is when you have pollutants that go directly into a water, including directly from a concentrated feeding operation into a water. So the entire farm directly into a water. So CAFO is like a pipe under the Federal Clean Water Act. It goes directly in unless that discharge, the introduction of the pollutant is from land application of manure or fertilizer. If you land apply, you land apply according to site-specific nutrient conditions, you qualify for what's called the agricultural stormwater exemption. So that's not a discharge if you are applying according to site-specific nutrient conditions. But if you fail to do that, that is a discharge. So if you're out there with your honey wagon and you are just spraying it all over the place and not according to a plan, not according to the conditions for that field, and it runs off into the water, that is the discharge. But if you're out there land applying according to your nutrient management plan and it rains and some of that manure goes into the water, that is not a discharge. So moving down on page 23, line 11 through 12, there's a definition of the medium CAFO. Medium CAFO, 200 to 699 mature dairy animals. On page 24, you'll see those additional criteria that are required to determine if there's a medium CAFO. There are 2 here instead of 3, but it's kind of, you can still be a medium CAFO and violate your nutrient management plan and require a permit. And that's an issue of debate between the 2 agencies right now. But generally, if there's a direct discharge, if there's a discharge that originated outside or flow over and come into contact, that's how you're going to be determined to be an MFO. You can see that definition of point source, page 24, line 12. You'll see that the pipe is the same thing as a CAFO, except for that agricultural stormwater. Page 25 is that definition of production area. Basically, what is going to trigger the fact that you do not have vegetation where your animals are over 45 days in a calendar year. And there's everything here. I got a question, well, doesn't include stables? Yes, it includes stables. Doesn't include your feedlot? Yes, it includes your, it's everything that you can think of that's on a farm where there would not be vegetation. Page 25, line 20, the small concentrated animal feeding operation. So this is a little bit different from the large farms and the medium farms. You're not going to immediately be determined to be CAFO if you have the right numbers and you have a discharge. That there has to be a determination that you're a significant contributor of pollutants to waters of the state, and either of the following conditions are met. You have that discharge directly, or you have the discharge of waters flowing out from outside, flowing through. Okay. There's going to be some discretion in designating small farms or small AFOs as needing the federal AFO permit, and that's consistent with federal law. So just be aware that the program is going to start with the large and the medium farms, and move down to the small farms. And some small farms may not need the federal AFO permit.
See, why is that?
Because there's going to be a determination whether they're a significant contributor of pollutants to waters of the state.
Okay.
So that instead of just being discharged, yes, you're in. There's a discharge, but you have to be determined to be a significant contributor of pollutants.
Go ahead, question here.
So I'm thinking, is there, if I'm a small farm and this is effective 1 July. You know, how are we gonna get the information out of the small farmers? We're gonna have a public hearing, we're gonna. Who's responsible, to make sure that information gets down so they can get compliance? And if they don't, are there fines that are gonna be levied against them?
Well, again, they're gonna start with the medium and the large farmers. And there's gonna need to be a transition period as well, because the agency's gonna have to do some rulemaking. And you don't see it in the bill. But the agency sent back a more detailed response to EPA's request for a corrective action plan on. I'm getting my dates mixed up, was it Tuesday? And it has a timeline in it for how they're going to implement everything. It's gonna be the timeline of years, of a couple of years.
Okay, sure.
Moving down on page 26, line 9, you'll see the powers of the Secretary of A&R under this new CAFO subchapter. And it specifically says they will be the ones implementing the Clean Water Act to administer Vermont pollution discharge elimination CAFO program that is consistent with the federal Clean Water Act and the enabling rules. They will make the rules, revise and amend them for that, these CAFO program guidelines, procedures, etc. On page 27, they shall designate any APO that meets the definition of CAFO as a CAFO in its sole discretion. That's another thing that EPA wanted to clarify. They shall designate any small APO as CAFO. If after on-site inspection, the Secretary determines the small APO is discharging and is a significant contributor. Then there are factors that the agency will review in determining if there is a significant contributor, and you see that size, location, means of conveyance, site conditions. And then going on to page 28. You'll see the CAFO permit requirements and then language relating to exemptions. So the first subsection A is the discharge from CAFO to waters of mineral litter or processed wastewater. Is a discharge subject to NIT permits except for those mineral litter or wastewater have been defined according with the set specific nutrient management plan. That is clearly the same kind of standard. And page 28, precipitation related discharge from the land area controlled by LFO shall be considered an exempt ag stormwater discharge only where it's been applied according to site specific nutrient conditions. Page 29. All MFOs and LFOs shall maintain documentation of nutrient management plans and practices on site or at a nearby office to make the documentation readily available to the Secretary upon request. Another thing to note is that the nutrient management plans are now going to be part of the permit application process. When you are required to get the CAFO permit, your nutrient management plan has to be part of the application. That means it's going to be public. And so just FYI, how they make them public, and they're like 10,000 pages long. That's for somebody with IT genius.
Control F.
Right.
Language.
Moving down on page 29, there is a presumption in law that if a farm is complying with the required agricultural practices, it doesn't need a discharge permit. But that doesn't true up with the federal CAFO requirements and EPA's directive that A&R has to go out and inspect these farms to determine if there is a discharge. So the language on page 29, 6 through 9 says the presumption that farms in compliance with the RAPs are not discharging is not applicable to any APO determined by the Secretary's decision to be APO. So that's where the Secretary has gone out and said there's the discharge. The fact that you're complying with the RAPs doesn't immunize you from a permit any longer. And then there's subsection about what is prima facie evidence of a discharge.
Before we go on to that, so I just wanna make sure I'm understanding, are you saying that this section needs to change in order to be to true up with the federal capability?
No, this
Makes
is
it, okay.
truing it up.
Oh, okay, this is true, okay.
So you don't need that CAPO permit until A&R's determined there's a discharge. Even if you argue I've been complying with my RAPs. That's not a defense anymore, that A&R's determined there's a discharge or evidence of a discharge. And therefore you need that CAPO permit.
Okay.
And so you will see what is prima facie evidence, so that is just. Prima facie is just by the nature of its existence, it proves the fact.
So I want to pause here for a second, team, because we have, I know we've seen a lot of this language before. I think it is also, I don't think it's a bad thing to see it again, but just wanted to check in with everybody. Okay, so this is still, okay, because I especially want to make sure that we highlight any places that are different, you know, from S100. You mentioned that there were some requests that came in afterwards, so I just want to make sure that we're gonna flag that, but it sounds like this is valuable, so I am happy to, like, there's a lot here.
You're almost done.
Okay, all right.
So
Okay.
the last really substantive provision is that prima facie evidence is that. If there's observed discharge from the police or evidence of recent prior discharge. Or staining of the drainage swell and standing water, then that is a determined enough evidence to show that you have a discharge. Now you're pretty much out of the main statutory changes. There's a section 9 session law stakeholder working group. That's a pre-rulemaking process to gather input on CAPOs. This is an S100. It has some tweaks about how it works, especially about dates. And so on page 30, coming back to you February 15, 2026, before it was coming back to you. I can't remember if it was January or February, but you give them more time in this draft. Section 10, this is a conforming change. It conforms to provisions about discharges and exceptions on page 32. You'll see that language, current language, which is being struck, that discharge permits under CDE are not required if you're complying with the RAPs. It's provided that the introduction of waste from sources that comply with the Clean Water Act and federal CAPO, then you don't need a VIPT's permit if you're subject to the RAP. So you have to be not requiring a CAPO permit in order to not require a discharge permit. On page 33, this is striking all the MOU language, putting in the document that EPA wants assigned roles and responsibilities. Page 35, this is another clarification. If we're here or when you are required to get a CAPO permit, you need a discharge permit. 35 to 36 to 37 is changing the MOU language again. And then on page 37, the Secretary of A&R requires nutrient management plans for all CAPOs and include those plans and permits, which we've already talked about. Page 37, lines 6 through 10. Once a CAPO is covered under a CAPO permit, they get 5 years of term under that permit. And they have to renew every 5 years unless it wants to opt out if that demonstrates not discharge. In section 12 of the conforming amendment to the exemptions for stormwater discharges. This is just basically clarifying that if you need a CAPO permit for a discharge, you do not qualify for the stormwater exception when complying with RAPs. And that's one.
Amazing. Yes, go ahead.
So I've been looking at my notes from when we walked through S100, and there was the question about whether or not we needed the definition of continuous discharge. Is that in 124 or not?
It is, and I haven't talked to the agency about whether or not it is required, whether or not that's something they want for the underline in chapter 47. I haven't had that opportunity.
Okay, and then I made a note about the sort of differences between the water's definitions. And then I had this note about add not complying with nutrient management practices, like with LFOs. Question.
Well, that's,
You know what I mean?
yes, it's under the MFO.
Yeah, right.
Definition of the MFO. And there's discussion between the agencies about whether or not that is a trigger under the Federal Clean Water Act. I think you should talk to the agencies about that.
Okay, but it's not in this, it's not in 124. Because it's not in 100, for MFOs,
The same definition, the same issue is in both.
124, okay. And then. There was another, here it is, there was another. Something about not intended to be done by rule, the question about the. With, on page 19 of S100. And there was I remember turning around and talking to the council from A&R about this, and there was a question about rulemaking and what was supposed to be done by rule.
But mine on.
It's the language after you cross out all the MO.
Oh, yeah, the CAFO's permits are not going to be issued by rule.
Okay, and do you remember why I noted that? Was it, did we have a concern about them not being issued by rule, or was it just I was noting it too?
I don't.
You don't remember that, obviously.
I mean, I remember, I don't know why you wrote.
Okay. I
I was gonna have the same note, and it's also equally ambiguous.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what we were noting as things that we would potentially want to.
I will just say that most of the general permits that the agency issues are not issued by rule. There are. I think there's one or two stormwater permits, but most of the general permits otherwise are not issued by rule.
So this is consistent with what usually happens, okay?
Oh, and then we do have a hand back here. Would you mind introducing yourself for the record?
Catherine Guessing, general counsel for.
Oh, yeah,
AR.
you're the one. First to be in the same place.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
First, the agency plans to have kind of a outreach plan for farm, where we will go out to farmers and talk to them about the changes and about the permits. Secondly, when we promulgate a new version of a general permit, we have to go through a public process. There's a minimum of a 30-day comment period, and we probably would extend that to some extent because this will be kind of a new approach, having A&R sort of promulgate the general permit and also the individual permits, and we'll probably want to work with farmers to make sure that not only that these permits are consistent with federal law, but they're also responsive to on-site issues in Vermont, right? Because farms in Iowa are probably very different than farms in Vermont. So I
Okay,
hope that answers the question.
yeah, I mean, I think mostly it's just the fact that it's not gonna be by rule, but you'll still have the same
Yeah.
public process that you would if it had been by rule.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And in addition, part of the corrective action plan is that we have to engage in lawmaking. So that'll be a separate project process that will go through, the the rulemaking process was just.
Is
Sorry, I
that,
didn't quite hear you. It's not what now?
We also, as part of the corrective action plan, have to promulgate a CAFO rule.
Oh, okay.
So we will be going through that process, that very public process as well.
do we have to include that in these drafts?
They have.
They have
I
that
think
authority
it's
already, okay.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Another question here.
Well, so, that was one of my questions, is how we made the word out. I can remember being on the education committee, Act 1.7 came out that changed how we fund education and people didn't hear about it, didn't know, we got more invasive, but page 30. This is another question I hear a lot is, I think it's line 15 and 16 talks about feedback, implementing regulatory structures, including the New York State Department of Environmental Protection CAFO program. So it's not just applying to Vermont, it's gonna apply to New York and Vermont.
No, this is just a stakeholder group and they're gonna be looking at different things. And one of the things they'll look at is how New York does its regulatory program. I will note that New York and Vermont are different. Because Vermont, it has a different TMDL for Lake Champlain than New York does. And there are additional load reduction requirements under the TMDL for agriculture that New York farms don't have. With that said, I think most New York farms get CAFO permits. And there's a way to get out of it. And I can't remember how to get out of it.
Do you want mine?
Oh, sure, yeah. Go
Good
ahead.
morning, it's Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. So as I understand it, there's about 463 CAFOs under the federal definition, which just means large farm in New York, but none of them have a CAFO permit. They do have a state permit that their Department of Environmental Conservation oversees, which is, I think, actually exceeds the federal CAFO permit in many ways. They would be CAFOs, I think, potentially otherwise, right?
So
They did used to have CAFO permits, and then I think the New York Supreme
And I
Court struck
think one of the
down.
ways you get out of that is that you get an industrial discharge permit. I think that's something that you can do in New York,
I'm not sure about
but
that.
that requires pre-treatment.
it doesn't really apply, I guess, I just wanna, what I hear a lot is that if the goal is to clean up Lake Champlain, you can't do it from one side of the lake. And I know there's a lot of extenuating.
So that's true, but when you look at what the sources on each side of the lake, on Vermont side of the lake, developed lands and ag are the main sources.
I get it. I know.
New York side of the lake, I can't remember what's the main source, is it developed lands?
I think so, yeah.
But as long as we get a program where we're gonna go out, we're gonna make the rules and we're gonna go talk to the people that are affected by this, I don't have a
But
problem.
I will tell you that I think every large farm owner knows about what's coming and most every medium farm owner, I think knows. And it's also a common knowledge with the small farms. And they hired lobbyists to like come and be here all the time.
Senator Hardy, go ahead.
Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to note, the reason why this language about New York State is in here is this stakeholder process is language that I came up with, and in talking to farmers and farm consultants in my district, they were like, oh, New York has a really good program. We should look at what they're doing when we're developing ours. And they often farm consultants work with both New York and Vermont. They have, very similar community sort of connections, especially in our area of the city where they can just go across the border. So that's why this is in here. It doesn't have to be, I'm sure they would still look at New York and other relevant states, but it was just suggested it would be a good thing to go through.
That's what I was saying.
We have one more comment from here, but then I want to check in with you about the next part after we're done with this. So, yeah, go ahead.
Emma Scholdice with Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance. We appreciate what New York does, and we would like to look at New York, but not mirror New York, because New York is the 5th largest dairy across the country. So it's just apples and oranges comparing wise, but we'd like to look and see if we can mirror it. But not do it's almost impossible to do the exact same thing because of Vermont being so small.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
So are we, any other questions on the language as we just walked through it? Okay, so Mr. Gray, I knew we had, you might need to be on the floor at some point, is that?
Yeah, I'm supposed to get the bat signal.
Okay, so you have not gotten that signal yet. Amazing, okay. I just wanted to check in to make sure you were still good. Great.
Oh,
So just to frame this up a little bit, so we've been through S-100 and now 124. There is another bill about this same topic, which is H-146, which we have not seen. But particularly instead of walking through it, which a lot of it may be similar, I asked Mr. O'Grady to come up with like just highlighting like what are the key differences, just so that we have all the ideas on the table and we can be, considering all the possibilities as we, choose how to move forward. And, open to that.
Is this, I'm confused by this, because you gave me 3 sheets, but one's not.
Oh,
Single, so is the state.
oh, do you want to?
I just don't know which is first, second, third.
You can,
Okay, yeah, this is an extra.
Yeah, I have just.
Okay, I have one from Michael.
okay.
So should I start walking through?
Yes, that'd be great.
So this is a side by side of the key principles in S-100 and H-146. S-100 is the second part of the bill that you just walked through. S-124 is. It's those provisions related to A&R's responsibilities and requirements to meeting EPA requirements for permitting vehicles. And you will see in the left-hand column, when it relates to an EPA directive, I put what the EPA directive was in that letter that they sent to Secretary Moore in September. So there was 7 directives, and you will see all of them in that left-hand column. H-146 is the bill that was introduced in the House that would have shifted all of the agricultural water quality program from the Agency of Agriculture to the Agency of Natural Resources, and would left really just a few ag water financing programs at the Agency of Agriculture. So this is side by side of those major concepts. So that first row, enforcement of CAFO discharges. EPA said A&R must enforce against farms that are discharging without a permit. You'll see the specific language from both bills. In S-100, it says that A&R has the authority to implement all the following, including implement the Federal Clean Water Act to administer the 50s CAFO program. And then you'll see the specific section where the discharge permit may be required. Similarly, in H-146, there is a provision that no person shall operate a large CAFO, medium CAFO, or small CAFO without a CAFO permit issued by A&R. And the Secretary may require anyone to get a CAFO permit at any time. And then by adding the CAFO permit to NBSA Chapter 47, A&R's default enforcement authority applies for both of these bills. And so there's a lot more statutory provisions that would apply about permitting and enforcement and appeals that I just didn't include this as and then the second, what agency regulates ag water quality that does not require a CAFO permit? Well, for S100, it would stay with the Agency of Agriculture. With H146, the secretary, everything's transferred. Everything from the ag non-food source program is transferred to A&R. And then what is the inspection authority performs, and the EPA directive was A&R personnel must inspect all potentially jurisdictional farms and determine if a CAPO permit is required. Under S100 says A&R has the authority to exercise all the following: designate any small APO as CAPO after on-site inspection. The tax secretary determines the APO is discharging. There's other inspection authority in S100. And then in H146, A&R may inspect any farm at any time to carry out the provisions of this subchapter. So in both bills, it's A&R doing the inspections. In S100, you'll see that there's some language about A&R coordinating with the Agency of Ag, but the primary inspection authority is A&R. Review of nutrient management plans, EPA directive, A&R personnel must review nutrient management plans and issue CAPO permits consistent with state and federal requirements. We just walked through this in S124, but S100 has that provision. The secretary shall require nutrient management plans for all CAPOs and include those plans in the permits, subject to public comment. Similar language in H146, nutrient management plan shall at a minimum be consistent with the requirements, and then CAPO permits, etc., shall be public records. So nutrient management plan part of the permitting process under both bills. Review of enforcement actions, the EPA directive that A&R must comprehensively track permitting, monitoring, and enforcement action. Neither bill fully sets out like how they're going to comprehensively monitor. But the A&R corrective action plan response to EPA does have language about how they're going to get access to the Agency of Agriculture's database. They have the permit bulletin, permit database. So that there will be tracking and monitoring, and I just discussed how there is already enforcement in default statutes for Title 10, Chapter 47. That would be under both bills. Staffing needs. S100 doesn't address. EPA said A&R must have sufficient personnel to fully implement the foregoing requirements in a timely manner. S100 doesn't really address staffing. H146 does require A&R to submit to you, the General Assembly, a report regarding whether there's sufficient appropriations and staffing for A&R to implement ag water quality program. In addition, A&R's response for the corrective action plan does have, I don't know, a request for 1 permanent FT and 2 contractors in the first year, then 2 FTEs after that, and maybe some more contracting. And then it's like to be determined after that.
I have a question here, Ted.
So the, first, just a simple question, the top of the page, it says S100, can I assume we can line through that and put F1.4 next to it?
You could, yeah.
So, does it, Agency of Ag, if we use some of their resources too with that, we don't have a JFO number, that part. So can we assume that the Agency of Ag would, the people who work with them too, to fill some of those FTEs?
I mean, part of what EPA is saying is that A&R needs to have a standalone program with sufficient staff of its own to do the inspections, review, and permitting. And I think the key part of that of its own, so that there isn't overlap of jurisdiction between the 2 agencies. Does that mean that they're not going to cooperate and coordinate? And some of the language in S100, 124 does recognize that they will. They're going to have that document about how they're going to implement their responsibilities and how they're going to cooperate. How they might cooperate on inspection. And so, okay. But as to sharing staffing. I think EPA is probably gonna want definitive staff at AM.
My understanding is the budget bill also includes, at least the governor's recommend includes staff for A&R.
Right, I think that's the one FTE and the 2 contractors.
It's 2 FTEs. And we also have 1 vacant position that we're going to try to roll over into the CAFO program from another program. And then there's additional money sort of requested for contracting services. Which would include both perhaps inspectors, but maybe. Yes.
Did you get the bad signal?
Yeah.
Brandon, we'll
Thank
put a
you.
pause on this. Thank you. This, I'll just say my part, this is dense and I want to be able to wrap my head around it, so we might have you back at some point to,
Sure. You know.
go through this again. Or at least finish it.
This is helpful.
Yes, yeah, I think this is helpful. So we're gonna pause on the CAFO stuff. Since we are all here, well, actually, what I'm envisioning is taking just a couple minute break to reset our brains. And since we're all here, we'd love to have a vote on the confirmation of Secretary Moore. And then if you have folks that you are ready to report out on appointees, maybe we can. I didn't get anything this morning to say like, oh, we're gonna have a break, let's do it. But just thinking about the possibility that we don't have to do them all at once, we could do them in batches. So if folks are ready to report on appointees, we'll do that. But let's take a few minute break for now. Actually, let's take a break until 10:15.
That's fine.
Okay. All right, so it's the Senate Natural Resources and Energies, on, gosh, it's the 21st of March, and we're back from a break.
That's right, I'm the.
And we're gonna jump right in with discussion and vote on the confirmation for Secretary Moore, so we had her in yesterday, good conversation, and we were able to be here for that. Any thoughts or discussion on Secretary Moore's confirmation? I think she's great, really delighted to have her, so definitely qualified. So if we're ready to vote, let's do we need a motion for this? Yes,
It's just a procedural question. She's already been appointed. Do we have to, is this like every 2 years, every 4 years? or-
Yes, every 2 years.
Every 2
There's a
years.
new
Okay.
administration, they're newly reappointed, approved.
Okay, yes.
For her position, it has to be a formal vote.
Okay, just wondering.
yeah, that's a good question.
Right.
Is there a motion to confirm? Okay, great. Right, Secretary, no, not Secretary, Clerk, can you call the roll?
No, no. Senator Beck. Yes. Senator Baumgart.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes,
Okay, 500.
great.
And who will report
I will
this?
do that.
Okay.
Okay, and if folks have people that they want to report out on that they were able to connect with, now's great. I have a couple, but yeah.
Try to find it.
Yeah, sure. Do you want a minute?
Yep.
Okay. Senator Bex, do you have one?
I've connected with all 4 of mine. And I just be short and sweet. So Karen Hale, Brett Bowden, Vermont Citizen Advisory Committee on my Plain Future, Richard Craig, Lamoille County member of the Fish and Wildlife Board, and Kirsten Sultan, the Land Use Review Board. I communicated with all. They all are aware that they are in this position and they're very excited to do it, and they're alive.
Yeah, they're all alive.
And they're not.
Yeah.
They're okay, qualified, decent.
Yeah, they're good people. They're already doing it. They're already doing it. They're excited to do it.
Good, and yeah, you're feeling that they're all
Yeah.
so great. Super, did you want?
I've connected with Janet,
Okay,
and Janet is, I don't know how, Janet is so qualified
Janet, who is it with?
for the chair of the board.
Of the Lord.
yeah,
So long as we, very decent human being, about no lag.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, go ahead.
I have one that I was able to connect with, I still have 2 more to do. Sarah Had, who's also on the Land Use Review Board. She also is extremely qualified, has a very impressive resume of the things that she's done, including working at the municipal level as a town manager. She was also director of planning and zoning for the town of Colchester, a town planner for Colchester, associate planner for Burlington, South Burlington. And she is, and also did planning stuff for Williston, so she's got a lot of really good planning, mostly focused on Chittenden County, but she's also been the town manager of Fairfax. Which is Fairfax also in Chittenden, where's Fairfax? In Franklin County, I thought it was a little more. And she's, a professional planner. She was the 2014 Professional Planner of the Year for Northern New England. She's extremely qualified, and I had a nice conversation with her. And she went to UVM for her master's and to Cornell, which is in my hometown, for her bachelor's. So
That's great.
yeah.
Super, yes, go
I
ahead.
got one, Hillary Solomon. She's the Holy Meadowy Soil Conservation, so everybody in my district knows. She works hard between the regional planning commissions, the municipalities. She's the go-to person for small farmers that have a question or an issue, and she knows her way around the state of Australia.
What was she appointed to?
She was the Lake Champlain.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Library Council. So, she's the, coordinates with town lake associations, variety of landowners, serves as the, partner with the Salt Lake Champlain Clean Water Service Provider. She is the, she has a, and, this has to do with my property, but, she started the Flower Brook Tactical Watershed. Advisory group, so, really a quality person, very cooperative. And she has a good team. She's also got a nursery in the town of Bowman where she grows fruit trees and so on and help. But she's a go-to person for grants. Everybody has a grant that they need to encourage your help. No, I highly recommend her. I've got 3 more to do. One more for the Lake Champlain Advisory Committee and then 2 for Fish and Wildlife. I should get those done this week.
Yeah. Great. Super. I had a couple of folks, Bob Fisher, also appointed to the Lake Champlain, the Citizens Action Committee on Lake Champlain's future, and just a fabulous human, really, just so active with all issues related to discharge stuff. Like, so he was in charge of the Montpelier wastewater treatment facility for something like 8 years, and then he's been at the South Burlington wastewater treatment facility there, and has been involved. This is a reappointment for him, so he's very familiar with this group and their work, and he's been involved. I don't know if you remember the living machine that was at South Burlington. So he sort of inherited that when he moved there, and tried to get it back up and running, but it was not
It died.
it died unfortunately. But like that's the kind of thing that he's very innovative, but very interested in the quality of the lake and making sure that it stays clean. So so he was great. And then I also spoke with Alex Weinhagen, who is also, he was appointed to the LURB as well, the Lake Distribution Board, and was also a planner in both Westford and in Heinsberg. And he's the person who is on the LURB taking on the tier 3 and forest blocks part of the rulemaking process. So that's going to be interesting and challenging work. But he has a background in wildlife biology. That's his training, and he did a lot of that work around wildlife biology in the Northeast Kingdom. So even though he's in Chittenden County, he's got a broader view of this state and needs across not just Chittenden County, and so yeah, he's very qualified and is excited about the work. So great. So let's I'd love to have a motion to confirm all these folks are together. So I want to make sure I have everybody's name. So I think you had Sarah had.
Yeah.
Yep. And you had Hillary Sullivan. I had Alex Weinhagen, Bob Fisher, I had Janet Hurley, and I didn't catch the names of the people that you had.
Karen,
Okay.
that's Karen with a Y.
Okay. Oh, how?
Aryn.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have Brett Bodie,
Okay.
BOW, Richard Craig, and Kirsten Sultan.
Great. Right, is there a motion, yeah, to confirm all of these? Okay, do we need a sheet for this? We don't need a sheet for this, okay.
So you just voted
Correct.
as an Fish and Wildlife Board?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's on my list too.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I did, that was different. That was Richard Craig.
Oh,
I did Brett for the Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee on Lake Champlain.
okay.
So it's a good point out that.
But we've been doubled up, so, or there were two people by the name of Brett Bowden.
Oh,
No problem, in our small state. I
Yeah.
see, did not know we had
There are
two
group
attorneys.
in Vermont.
Multiple animals.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
have two constituents.
Yeah, I believe it.
Good to hear that.
One with, one without.
Yeah, surprisingly common, yeah.
I
We
have,
should have a party.
I've never met a longboards.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Kind of second. So we don't have a sheet to check this off on, so should we just,
I just turn in,
sorry, say again?
I just turn in the sheets.
Oh, you just turned in the sheets, okay.
Except for Julie.
So I think we can just, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so, all these folks are recommended for confirmation and, we'll see them.
The rest of them.
Yeah, so you have these sheets, Jude, you don't need them back from us, those were just copies.
I just gave you copies.
Okay,
So these just move through without,
You do.
they'll be at the end, they'll be at a set, and so those, do you wanna explain? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what, we generally do them every Friday has been the tradition, and Senator Collmore will stand up as chair of ops and make a motion to approve anybody who's not underlined as a group.
Correct.
Any senator can ask that somebody be removed if they wanna vote on them separately or have questions about them and or wanna debate, that's always an option. The ones that are underlined are usually commissioners and secretaries or major boards, and they get a floor report and usually are roll call vote.
so that that is not gonna happen with the word.
I don't know actually with the alert, did you ask Blue?
I didn't ask Bloomer, but in the past, it's just been the chair.
Just the chair of the LURB, okay, cause I know that, like, for example, the Green Mountain Care Board, those are all
Yeah.
done, and PUC are
Separately.
all done separately. So
We should
the
find out.
LURB is kind of in that sort of range, so it might be, I don't know.
I mean, they changed the name in the past when they were just natural resources.
Yeah, I don't know where he draws the line,
Yeah.
you know, so.
Yeah.
Oh, we can check.
Okay, that'll be, yeah, we should check on that.
Yeah.
And certainly Secretary Morris will be separate,
Yeah,
so find out about.
yeah, we should ask, cause otherwise, cause those of us, if you had somebody from the LURB too,
Yeah.
so did I, if we need to do a floor report, we should.
Yeah, we should find that out, yeah. Okay. Great, all right, super, so assuming that we are not gonna get, Michael O'Grady back today, so with